2 weeks before the first snow, Mara Vale watched the candle flame bend sideways over a crack in her cabin floor. The stove was out. No fire burned in the hearth. No smoke moved in the chimney. But from the dark square beneath her table came a slow breath of air, warmer than the room, carrying the smell of wet stone, creek mud, and old earth. Mara knelt beside the opening with one hand wrapped in cloth because her palms were still split from digging. She lowered the candle closer. The flame leaned again, not upward, not flickering from wind through the walls. It leaned toward the hole, as if the mountain underneath her cabin had finally begun to breathe. For the first time in 4 months, Mara smiled. 4 months earlier, she had been told to leave the only house she knew. Her Uncle Reuben had waited until supper was finished, until the plates were stacked, until her aunt had stopped meeting her eyes. Then he said, "You are 19. I will not feed another grown mouth through winter." Mara looked at her aunt, but the woman folded a dish towel into a square and kept folding after there was nothing left to fold. By dawn, Mara's trunk sat beside the road, not packed carefully, not tied down, just left there with her father's old coat thrown across the top, as if even the coat no longer belonged indoors. Mara did not beg. She had learned long ago that begging made cruel people feel generous. She lifted what she could carry and walked north along the Cumberland Ridge, toward land nobody wanted. The mountain farms ended first. Then the wagon ruts became deer tracks. Then the deer tracks vanished into laurel and shale. On the second evening, with rain sliding down her collar, she found an old charcoal cutter's cabin above a narrow creek gorge. It leaned badly. One wall had bowed outward. The roof had 2 patch places, and one place that needed prayer. But the foundation stones were set deep, and behind the cabin, the hill dropped sharply toward black water moving between boulders. Most people would have seen a ruin. Mara saw a slope. Years before, her father had shown her how root cellars worked. He said the ground was slow. Air panicked when weather changed, but earth remembered yesterday, last month, last season. Dig deep enough and summer could be stored. Dig wisely and winter could be softened. Mara did not remember the whole explanation. She remembered one drawing, a house, a buried passage, and arrows showing air moving through the ground before entering the room above. At the time, she thought it looked like a child's trick. Standing beside that broken cabin, with rain on her face and nowhere else to go, the trick looked like mercy. So she began to dig. Not a mine, not a cellar, not a hiding place. A buried air gallery. She started beneath the cabin floor and cut downward through the hill, aiming for the creek gorge below. The upper end would open under the room. The lower end would open near the water, where cold air pooled and the ground stayed damp and deep. Between them, stone and soil would do what wood fires could not do forever. At least, that was what Mara hoped. The first week nearly broke her. The clay came out in wet slabs. Then the clay turned to gravel. Then the gravel turned to shale that snapped her shovel edge twice. Roots crossed the passage like black ropes. Water seeped in after every hard rain. More than once, part of the ceiling slumped, forcing her to crawl backward through mud with a lantern in her teeth. When Elias Booker found her, she was waist-deep in the trench, prying out stones with a crowbar. He had come up the ridge delivering salt to 2 trapping camps. His mule stopped first. Then Elias saw the hole. "Mara," he said, staring at the cut beneath the cabin. "Tell me that is not your grave." She wiped mud from her cheek. "It is an air run."
"A what?"
"A passage."
"To where?"
She pointed down the hill. Elias looked past the cabin toward the gorge, then back at the hole. "You are tunneling to the creek."
"Yes."
"In mountain stone."
"Not all of it is stone."
That was the first time he laughed, not cruelly, but enough. The second time he returned, he brought a sack of turnips and stood at the edge of the trench with the expression people wear when they are deciding whether kindness requires an argument. "You know Winter is not impressed by cleverness," he said. Mara set another brace under the ceiling. "Neither is hunger." He had no answer for that. By late summer, everyone on the ridge knew about the girl carving a hallway under her cabin. The mill boys called it Mara's wormhole. Someone in town said she was digging a place to freeze privately. Someone else said the mountain would close its mouth and swallow her. Mara heard all of it when she came down for nails. She bought the nails anyway. Every night she hauled rock by lantern. Every morning she packed the walls with clay and fitted flat stones along the sides. She wedged chestnut beams overhead, then cross-braced them with scavenged planks from the old charcoal sheds. When rain filled the lower section, she dug a shallow drain and lined it with broken slate. By September, the passage reached halfway down the slope. By October, it reached the gorge. Mara built the lower mouth behind a screen of boulders and willow roots, facing the creek but lifted high enough that floodwater would not pour straight inside. She hung a rough door there, then another beneath the cabin floor. Between the 2 doors stretched 93 feet of narrow, stone-lined passage. It looked ugly. It looked impossible. It looked, to everyone else, like 4 months thrown into the ground. But Mara began testing it. She set 2 bowls of water out before dawn, one on the porch and one 15 steps inside the passage. The porch bowl skinned over with ice. The tunnel bowl stayed liquid. She hung strips of cloth near the hatch and watched them move even when the cabin was still. She placed her hand on the packed wall after cold rain and felt not warmth exactly, but steadiness. The wall did not follow the air. The wall followed the mountain. Elias stopped laughing first. He stood in the tunnel one evening while dusk turned the creek silver below them. A slow current touched his face. "This should be colder," he murmured. Mara lifted the lantern. "It is not trying to be warm. It is refusing to be sudden." That sentence stayed with him. Then the warning came. A circuit rider arrived at Cedar Hollow with ice on his horse's mane and a letter wrapped in oilcloth. He had ridden from the telegraph office 2 valleys over because the line there had been full of reports from northern towns. A freeze was dropping south. Not an ordinary cold spell, not early frost. A hard blue freeze, moving fast enough to lock rivers in their beds, and split green wood stacked too late. The oldest men at the store went silent when the writer read the letter. One of them finally said, "How long since we had one like that?" The writer looked at the paper again. 46 years, they say. After that, the valley changed sound. Axes rang until dark, barn doors were nailed tighter, blankets were carried from trunks, children were sent to gather kindling until their fingers burned. Every family counted wood, counted flour, counted animals, counted days. Elias rode to Mara's cabin before sunset. He found her below the floor, tightening a brace near the upper hatch. "You should come down to town," he said, "at least until we know what this is." Mara looked past him into the passage she had made, one bucket at a time. Then she looked at the cabin above it. "No," she said, "this is the only place that has ever kept faith with me." The freeze arrived before midnight. By morning, the creek gorge had white teeth along both banks. By the second night, water buckets froze solid in kitchens. By the third, people woke to nails glittering with frost inside their own walls. Wood piles shrank so fast men stared at them as if theft had happened. The cold did not creep, it struck. Wind came next, driving powdered snow through every bad seam in every house. Roofs groaned, windows sang. Livestock bawled in barns where breath turned into tiny crystals and fell like dust. Mara's cabin should have become a box of knives. It did not. It was not warm the way a rich house was warm. The fire still mattered. Blankets still mattered. But when the stove burned low, the room did not collapse instantly into ice. The floor held a dull, living steadiness. The walls cooled slowly. The air near the hatch kept moving. On the fourth morning, Mara opened the upper door and climbed down with a lantern. The world above was screaming. The passage below was quiet. Her boots touched packed earth that had not hardened like the yard outside. The stone walls sweated faintly. The air was cool, but compared with the ridge wind, it felt almost kind. She walked deeper, counting the braces. 30 steps, 50, 70. Near the middle, where the ground pressed thickest overhead, the temperature barely changed at all. She could feel the reason her father had tried to explain years ago. The mountain did not care what the sky had decided last night. It changed, slowly, and that slowness was saving her. That afternoon, Elias reached the cabin half frozen. He did not knock with his hand. He struck the door with his shoulder because his gloves had ice stiff around his fingers. Mara dragged him inside. For a while, he only sat near the stove, shaking. Then his eyes moved around the room. The water pail beside the wall was not frozen. The ink bottle on the shelf still had liquid in it. His breath showed, but faintly. "How?" he whispered. Mara lifted the hatch. Elias followed her down. At the first turn, he stopped. The lantern light showed the stone walls, the braces, the small drainage cut along one side, and the strip of wool Mara had tied near the ceiling. It fluttered gently, steady as a sleeping pulse. Elias touched the wall with his bare fingertips. Then he looked at her with shame spreading slowly across his face. "I told people you had dug a coffin." Mara held the lantern between them. "No," she said. I dug beneath the coffin. The freeze tightened for 6 more days. Chimneys cracked from overfiring. A barn roof on the west road fell under snow weight and killed 3 calves. The Haskins family burned a chair, then a bed frame, then the door to their back room. Old Mrs. Pruitt's kitchen wall grew fur inside it, white frost spreading over the planks like mold. On the 7th night, the knocking started. Not one knock, a storm of fists against Mara's door. When she opened it, snow burst into the room with the people. Mrs. Pruitt came first, wrapped in 2 quilts, her lips gray. Behind her were her daughter and 2 small boys, then the Haskins family, then a trapper with a frostbitten ear, then Elias pushing another man who could barely walk. They had not come to apologize. They had come because word had traveled faster than mercy. Mara Vale's cabin was not freezing. The room filled until there was almost no floor left. Children lay under the table. Men slept sitting against the wall. Someone brought cornmeal. Someone brought smoked meat. Someone else brought an armload of wood and looked embarrassed while setting it beside the stove. The door opened too often. Snow blew in each time. Bodies crowded the air. The stove could not possibly explain what happened next. The cabin held. Not perfectly, not comfortably in the way summer people imagine comfort, but it held above the dangerous edge while houses below it turned brittle. The buried passage kept drawing the violence out of the air. Each gust of frozen weather that slipped inside was slowed, mixed, softened by the earth current under the floor. For the first time, the people who had mocked the hole listened to it. At night, when the wind paused, they could hear the faint movement beneath the boards. A breath, a living draft, a mountain lending back what it had stored. Mrs. Pruitt sat near the hatch one morning and stared down at the darkness. "You moved your house into the ground," she said. Mara shook her head. "Only the part that needed remembering." On the 10th day, the sky finally opened. Not blue, not kind, just less murderous. People stepped outside and saw a valley remade in white. Fences had vanished. 2 sheds were flattened. Smoke rose from fewer chimneys than anyone wanted to count, but more than the freeze had deserved. They survived the thaw slowly. Then came spring. At first, people visited Mara's cabin with awkward hands and practical questions. How deep? How wide? How did she stop the roof from falling? Where did the lower door face? How much slope was enough? Did the drain freeze? How far in before the air changed? Mara answered all of it. She showed them the brace spacing, the stone lining, the creek-mouthed door, the wool strip that proved movement, the bowls she had used for testing. She warned them where she had nearly drowned the passage during rain. She told them not to trust soft clay without stone ribs. She told them to respect floodwater more than cold. By May, 3 families had started digging short earth runs behind their homes. By June, Elias had convinced the blacksmith to make narrow iron brackets for tunnel braces. By July, the men who once laughed at Mara's wormhole were arguing about soil depth and airflow as if they had invented concern. Mara did not correct them. One evening near the end of summer, Elias came up the ridge carrying a bundle of fresh-cut boards. Mara was sitting by the gorge, watching the creek move over stones that had been locked in ice half a year earlier. She looked at the boards. "What are those for?" Elias rested them against a tree and nodded toward the cabin. "Figured the passage could use a second branch before winter." Mara laughed then, quietly enough that the creek almost took the sound. Above them, the cabin looked no grander than it had before. The roof was still patched, the walls still leaned a little. Anyone passing too quickly might have seen only poverty, old boards, and smoke. But under it ran 93 feet of proof. Proof that the earth was not dead weight beneath a home. Proof that old knowledge can look foolish right up until the weather tests it. Proof that being thrown away by people does not mean being abandoned by the world. Mara stood in the last orange light and looked at the lower door hidden among boulders and willow roots. All winter, everyone had tried to survive by building higher fires against the cold. She had survived by going lower. And once the mountain had breathed beneath her floor, the whole valley remembered how to breathe with it.